think we've got.
Oh,
It's
we-
5:00, and we don't know if Bill's gonna make it. And who's that right now? Michael, I'm not sure if Michael's gonna make it.
He said he'd be here.
We're gonna give him a minute, and then go ahead and start.
Okay.
And I have to leave around 6:30. CHS and Buford are both having 7:00 end of year events.
Okay.
So, something, and, I mean, just have to pick people up and then get there, so whatever amount of
Well,
time.
we'll make sure-
Wherever there's a good time to
We'll make
break.
sure we start the round table or round robin. with
Yes,
you.
okay. Doesn't have to be on the dot, just.
So for the record, you volunteered to go first this time.
Right.
Guys, so that you let her off the hook the other day, last week, or a couple weeks
It
ago.
was starting to feel a little bit, whoa. That got all the way over here.
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
Sorry about that. You look like you were hot.
Thank
I was trying to help you out.
My legs have been cooled off, thank you.
Get some paper towels. Are you sure?
Chair with this fancy water.
I know. Sparkling.
My apologies,
Entirely different.
I'm good.
Oh, wow.
I figure it's just water.
That's what I smell. It just smells-
There was an explosion.
No, I do explosion. Twice a year.
Tradition. It's the beginning of the summer.
All right, Matt.
Are we ready, Chair?
Sir.
Patrick, can you pull up the presentation?
Afternoon, everybody. How's my audio?
Not good.
Can't hear you.
I think it is.
Where'd he go?
Is that any better?
Little.
How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah, better.
More.
Sorry.
No issue.
There we go. Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Matt Opley. I'm the Development Planning Manager for NDS. And I'll be leading the staff portion of the work session related to the Development Code amendments tonight. Our goal is to review some of the overarching issues, some proposed amendments, and discuss the implementation and explore solutions when presented. We'll start by walking through the key points we'll be covering this evening. We will begin by setting the stage with some background information. This will cover the context behind the proposed development code amendments, the current challenges, and the opportunities that we have in front of us. Next, I will explain the amendment tiers and detail how each tier works, what criteria differentiates them, and why this spectrum of options is important. By breaking down the tiers, you will see how the amendments are not one size fits all, but instead are tailored to address different levels of the needed, different levels of need in community engagement. Better. I will then move on to specific examples
of some of the proposed amendments. These examples will illustrate the kinds of changes we're considering. I'll point out key features, potential benefits, and real-world examples that these proposals might have on development. Following these examples, I will outline the next steps in our process. That section will cover the upcoming phases from further review and refinement of the amendments to plan feedback and adoption. Finally, I'll open the floor with targeted questions for the Planning Commission. This segment is designed to create a focused discussion and elicit valuable feedback. Your insight here is critical in refining our proposals as we move forward to a public hearing. Next slide. Let's take a closer look at our development code amendments. This slide provides an overview of where we've been with our code and where we are moving with these revisions. As you can see, our current development code was adopted on December 18th, 2023. It was crafted to facilitate a more form-based zoning approach aimed at increasing density, a goal that aligns closely with the 2021 Comprehensive Plan. This means our code was designed not just to set the rules, but as a tool to shape how our neighborhoods grow in a structured yet flexible way. However, as time has passed, staff has identified a number of issues, some minor, such as grammatical corrections, and others more significant, that need to be addressed to better achieve our city's goals. This recognition is a natural part of keeping our planning methods and regulations effective and respond to our community needs. To manage the necessary changes efficiently, we're using a three-tiered approach. Tier 1, this tier covers minor corrections, small adjustments, and ensures compliance with state regulations. These are straightforward fixes that keep our code neat and clear. Tier 2, here we are making modifications to address any oversights from the original drafting and offer clarification where needed. This ensures everyone has a common understanding of the regulations they are using. Tier 3 is more involved and provides a deeper policy level change, which naturally requires in-depth analysis along with meaningful community engagement. These changes are more substantial and will shape the way we approach long-term planning. For tiers 1 and 2, the next immediate steps is advance these changes to a public hearing with adoption this fall, which keeps the process on a timely and relevant. Tier 3, or selected issues from Tier 3, are a little bit harder and will need to be integrated into the broader FY26 NDS work plan. This allows us to manage our resources efficiently and involve the community on a larger scale. Finally, it is important to note that this isn't a one-time fix. We plan to update Tier 1 and Tier 2 on an annual basis to ensure the code remains adaptable and incorporates the best practices and supports sustainable growth in the future. This continued process is key to keeping our development code in line with both our current needs and future opportunities. Let's begin by looking at Tier 1 amendments. These adjustments are essentially the bread and butter fixes to ensure that our development code is clear and accurate as possible. The Tier 1 focuses address copying, editing issues, filling in missing text, and making small refinements. These tweaks help us accurately reflect the intent of the development code, ensuring that our document communicates our goals without ambiguity. An important part of Tier 1 is incorporating legislative updates. We've made sure to include changes based on recent actions passed by the Virginia General Assembly. This ensures that our code is not only up to date, but also remains compliant with current legal requirements. The scope here is quite focused. These are primarily technical corrections and minor adjustments. This means we're enhancing clarity and consistency without shifting the underlying policy direction. It's about fine-tuning the language rather than making changes. For these amendments, the next step is straightforward. The proposed Tier 1 changes will be presented at an upcoming public hearing. Finally, we view these corrections as part of an ongoing effort establishing regular annual updates to help maintain the accuracy of the development code and ensure we're staying in regulatory compliance. Next slide. This slide outlines some of the specific examples of Tier 1 amendments that fall into this area of grammatical changes. Next slide. This slide focuses on how Tier 1 amendments incorporated updates based on changes in state regulations that go into effect July 1st of this year. It's essential for our development code to reflect the most current state-mandated language and compliance requirements. One of our key responsibilities is to ensure that every reference in our code aligns with the latest requirements from the Virginia General Assembly. Under HB 2660, review deadlines for site plans, development plans, and subdivisions have been shortened. Staff will be able to address most of these updates in our development process review manual, but we will need to amend the code to align with the shortened timeframes for acceptance of complete applications for review. That timeframe has been shortened from 10 days to 5 days. Under SB 974, authority to review site plans, development plans, and subdivisions is shifting fully from Planning Commission to staff. Many sections of the development code will need to be amended to stay compliant with the updated state regulations. Remember, these updates are not a one-off task, but we'll have an annual review process to make sure we stay in compliance with all legislative requirements. Next slide. Now we'll move into the Tier 2 amendments. This phase of our review focuses on addressing oversights and ambiguities in the development code. It ensures a clear, practical, and will be as user-friendly as possible. At the core of Tier 2 is about resolving gaps and ambiguities that might have been overlooked in the initial drafting. By fine-tuning these areas, we're aiming to enhance the overall clarity and functionality of the development code. One example of these improvements is found in the fee schedule. Minor amendments are being proposed to help facilitate adjustments to the overall development review process that is currently being reevaluated by staff. The scope of Tier 2 is broad. It includes modifications, additions, and removals within the code. The goal is to improve how the provisions are interpreted and implemented so that every regulation works in harmony with our intended planning outcomes. These changes are designed to ensure our regulations support our planning goals more efficiently while keeping a consistent approach across the board. In essence, by clarifying language and addressing gaps, we're making it easier for everyone from staff and developers to understand the rules they're following. Like Tier 1, the proposals, some but not all within Tier 2, will be moving forward to a public hearing. And as with Tier 1, this will be a continuous process with amendments that will be evaluated on a yearly process moving forward. Next slide. As with Tier 1, here are a few examples of the amendments and proposed draft language to address the issues. For the first example, the current code is preventing attached dwelling units in the R districts. Staff has worked with applicants on a workaround involving sublots, but that process wastes time and money and is not contributing to the goals of more and different types of housing within the city. Staff is proposing to utilize the alternate form section of the code, and I will go into that more in detail at the next slide. The next example involves providing an avenue for residents and developers to make small improvements to their lots without going into expensive additions or adding to buildings or structures in the front yard to bring the existing building to conformity as it relates to the Build 2 requirement. This is intended to facilitate structures such as sheds and outbuildings while still preserving the intent of the code for a more urban streetscape for primary buildings. Examples 3 is related to codifying an existing policy when it comes to 1 and 2 unit construction of 1 and 2 dwelling units construction, and falls under the sub-tier of changes related to improving the development review process. Under the current code, all new construction and additions must have a development plan and a final site plan. This adds a lot of time and resources as it requires an applicant to go through a development review process prior to submitting a building permit. The policy from NDS has been to allow the building review process to stand in for development review with the final document becoming the code required development plan and final site plan. This is becoming difficult to track, and staff is proposing to remove new constructions and additions for 1 and 2 units from development review and go straight to building permit review. It should be noted that just because they would not go through a development review process, they are still reviewed for zoning compliance, all regulations within the zoning code during building review stage. Nothing in this amendment relieves an applicant from meeting the regulatory requirements. That includes requirements found in Chapter 10, water protection. Next slide. Here we have the alternate form example to address the code requirements that are preventing attached dwelling types in the R districts. This amendment will allow applicants to build attached dwellings and still conform to all the underlying regulations for each district. I'll leave this up just for a minute to study. Okay, next slide. This slide, in this section, I'll address the proposed amendments to the Neighborhood Development Services fee schedule. These changes are designed to support the upcoming updates to our development review process. The primary goal is to ensure that our fee structures align with the changing development review process that staff is currently undertaking. One of the anticipated updates involves modifying the fee structure for development plan review and final site plan submission. These changes are intended to reflect revised timelines, additional review steps, and new service levels that align better with what the desired outcome of the development code is as a whole. Fees for sublots and easement plats will be proposed as separate standalone application as opposed to the current approach of processing them under boundary line adjustments. This will make it easier for tracking and record keeping and having a better understanding of the number of sublots that we approve in this process. Next slide. Now we turn our attention to Tier 3 amendments. These represent the more comprehensive policy changes and policy changes that need to conform with the development code. Unlike the more technical tiers, Tier 3 would address the fundamental principles that guide our long-range planning efforts. Tier 3 is all about critical policy updates, and these amendments will focus on establishing or conforming key policy directions that require in-depth analysis because of their broad impact. They are significant because they affect long-term planning and involve a careful evaluation of our goals and policies. These are big-picture decisions that help us shape our community's future. Given the far-reaching nature of these changes, community engagement is paramount. Extensive outreach will need to be planned to gather feedback and ensure that any modifications align with the public's priorities. Due to their complex and the critical resources involved, Tier 3 amendments will be prioritized within the broader future NDS work plan. This means we're taking a phased, deliberate approach, one that will allow detailed research, stakeholder involvement, and an extended review period to ensure that every aspect is thoroughly vetted before implementation. Next slide. On this slide, I'll discuss several key examples of the Tier 3 amendments. These proposals are more than just technical updates. They represent fundamental policy changes that require in-depth analysis and broad community input to shape the long-term planning. The first example looks at re-examining height measurements, not just in terms of feet, but also the number of stories within our residential districts. Due to interlocking regulations tied to the facade and street facing, how stories are counted becomes very different per development. Staff continually runs into issues related to height in the R districts that was not present under the old code. These complex regulations may be preventing additional units by too strictly controlling story counts that could be regulated by maximum feet. Next, the guidelines for fences and walls under special exceptions permits could be up for review. Often these structures can carry significant visual and functional impacts on a site, yet the regulations has not always been clear-cut. By reevaluating these rules, we can ensure that that granting exceptions are both well-defined and aligned with our broader planning goals. Or conversely, remove these as they were not regulated under our old code, and the lack of regulations did not generate negative feedback in our department. Next, looking at the R&A district. This district has a unique characteristics identified in the comprehensive plan process and needs broad community engagement to ensure zoning regulations are meeting those goals. Another example is the reevaluation and better definition of what we mean by building within the R districts. This involves considering massing and allowing height based on the number of residential units, what we refer to as the townhouse effect. In many cases, height and massing can appear differently when looking at interior property lines versus external matrix. Clarifying the terms will ensure fair and consistent evaluation and help developers better understand what type of product can be built on a site. Currently, there are no established cutoffs for or qualifying date to determine what contributes an existing structure. Without clear criteria, the bonus may be applied inconsistently, and we need to look at establishing a clear qualification date that would help ensure that the bonus truly rewards historical or architecturally significant structures. Lastly, from this list of examples, the current lighting section does not explicitly address the unique requirements of athletic fields, whether on public or private land. Athletic fields need specific lighting consideration ranging from safety and energy efficiency to user comfort. By reevaluating and examining this section, we can provide clear guidance that matches the realities of the community space. Next slide. This slide outlines the timelines we are establishing for moving forward. Following our meeting tonight, we will have a work session with City Council on June 16th. This meeting ensures that our proposal align with the broader city objectives and work plan. From June through August, staff will work to refine the proposals based on the feedback received during these work sessions. This period involves drafting and producing the necessary materials to move the amendments forward. We are aiming for a September 9th formal public hearing at Planning Commission. This is a key moment for transparency, providing an open forum for community stakeholders, developers, and other interested parties to review the proposals, ask questions, and provide detailed comments. The process continues with another layer of engagement on October 20th during the public hearing at City Council. This session will further refine our proposal and ensure they meet both the technical criteria of the community and for adoption into the city code. Finally, we are hoping to have these proposals adopted by November 3rd of this year. But again, these last kind of 3 dates are all subject to change as we get closer, but those are what we're aiming for. Next slide. At this point, I will welcome any questions on the slide before I turn it back over to the chair to go over the questions in your packet. And with that, yes.
Is there gonna be any direct collaboration between us and council on this?
There's not, at this time, there's not scheduled a joint city council work session. We'll be, I believe on the 10th, we're gonna be bringing forward at our regular meeting. Materials we'll be sharing with city council on the 16th.
Okay.
But to date, no, there's not a joint city council planning commission work session.
Okay.
Question-wise, I guess, I really appreciate the tiers. I think that's cool, because obviously some things don't need to be discussed, and others are going to need some work. And maybe that's it for now. I mean, there's some more specific things, but in terms of
Certainly.
what you've presented, I think it seems, you know, for us, a year sounds like a long time, but seeing how all of these meetings have to go through and set up and the time to work, it seems like the tier 1 and 2 should be able to be done annually, and that the third one may or may not take longer, depending on, you know, first assessing how much research it's gonna take, and then, like you were saying, in terms of the, residential neighborhood, you know, kind of special zones, like, community engagement will take a while, so that those would, you know, have their own schedule. Yeah, so, thank you.
So are we supposed to, at this point, are we supposed to limit our questions to the kind of, I see there's like 3 questions on the slide, whether any proposed amendments have been assigned to the incorrect tier, et cetera?
Let's wait till we get general questions, and then we'll go through the
Okay.
A, B, and C.
Okay, gotcha. I think this is, echo Betsy's comments. I think this is a good approach, and I don't have anything to add at this point.
All right, and Rory.
Thanks. I guess no main questions really on this process, but one question, you know, some of these sort of, at least one of these sort of touches on the contents of the standards and design manual and conflicts between the code and the SADM. And I'm wondering if, you know, whether as part of this process or separately, there's some plan to begin to review what's in the SADM. As I recall, when we adopted it in 2019, we talked about doing a review every year. Of course, that was 2 city engineers ago. And whether we're thinking about how these two things integrate together.
Specifically, there hasn't been, I've been working with the city engineer very closely on our development review update proposals, but we have not had any conversations really about the SADM and revising it at this time.
Thanks.
Michael.
Again, being a non-voting member, I'm just grateful from the university's perspective to be sort of, have this presence here looking through it. I was mainly curious just, I mean, tier 1, I could see a lot of times as you use the code, you just find these typos and spelling errors and some grammatical issues. The tier 2, it seems like there's some other ones. Is this a feedback loop coming from people submitting applications or people who are interested in submitting, but they see kind of a sticking point? I was just curious about how the tier 2 stuff got daylit.
Yes, but it's also just, it's a living document. We're just trying to keep track of these as we're going through projects where we're hearing issues, but also where we're seeing issues as we're doing our review. So it gets added to, I won't say constantly, but we are adding to and keeping track of where we're running into not only the tier 1, really all 3 is what we're doing.
And then the only other, again, this is coming more from being a resident of the city, is the comment about the tier 3 is maybe some more clarity. I understand they're going for consideration, but I don't know if there's a tier 3, you mentioning the work plan, if there's some way in the annual process to update and be a little bit more upfront about where tier 3 currently stands and how, I imagine that backlog could grow quite sizable, and just, you know, at what point does something fall off tier 3 and not get adopted? But I don't know, just maybe a little bit more clarity. It seems like 1 and 2, you have a good sense of clarity if this happens on an annual basis. We have a process. Tier 3, I understand it's new, but maybe it'd be helpful once you go to council and other ones to have a sense of what that process looks like.
Tier 3 is definitely going to be about balancing priorities and working what we can into a larger work plan. So there is going to be some trade-offs. There'll probably be some, you know, some of those that might keep falling because they're just not raising to the level that shouldn't be addressed in this work plan yet. So that is
And
possible.
I don't know, maybe the tier 3 name is the issue because it kind of gives equity. Maybe it's more of an amendment sort of consideration group or something. It's, you know, something that differentiates it, because it sounds like if you were to drill down on tier 3, there's probably tiers of tier 3 of things that seem like we could do, and other things maybe feel like they're beyond the grasp. But anyway.
Yeah, and we're definitely wanting to keep track. We wanted to keep track of these things, whether tier 3 really needs to jump from tier 3 to a work plan. And so we're just making sure we're, you know, that there's somewhere that's all inclusive of these changes we're making. So at least we can look back at it and go, yeah, this has been on this list for several years, but it keeps getting bumped down because of other priorities.
Okay, thank you.
I think that was my question, was about, just whether we'd have a chance to interact with council. Because I feel like they don't necessarily always agree with us, and I just want to make sure that there's, some sort of dialogue between the two groups. And I don't know if that just means that you share your notes from the council meeting with us at our planning commission meeting that happens after that, or if there's some sort of, I don't know, some way to make that happen while keeping the schedule as efficient as you have it.
We can definitely have those discussions, yes.
Yeah, I think dovetailing off that, nothing in the schedule indicates any sort of interaction with us before the public hearing. Though I don't want to drag out the schedule, it seems like another touch point for a work session might be helpful kind of after things are drafted, or at least after a direction is determined on sort of any item that has any sort of nuance to it. I'd also add, in this plan, this has an initiation and a public hearing on the same date. That was one of the factors that was counted against Arlington when their expanded housing options ordinance was overturned. I expect that will probably be overturned on appeal, but we may want to initiate prior to that just to be safe.
Understood.
The tier 3 public interaction, public communication, public engagement piece, hopefully we'll give a lot of thought to that. I have nightmares going back to the early days of putting together the revised comprehensive plan, and the way and I mean collectively, we being the Planning Commission and we being NDS, we managed that. So hopefully we've learned a little bit from that, and we can streamline that a little bit, and we can know when we've done enough, because it seems like we got on a slippery slope and we just couldn't get off it. So it is my hope that we don't get back on the slippery slope again, and we just do it over and over and over again, and don't get to a point where we get a good decision on that.
And I'll say one of the kind of the litmus test we are using for these is a public hearing is a form of public engagement, but when there's something from these tiers that as a body, whether it's planning commission or city council or even staff feels this needs a touch point beyond a public engagement, it needs a public outreach process, that's when we feel it should be on the tier 3. So that's kind of been our litmus test, but as that dividing line between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3.
And the only point I'm attempting to make is we didn't know when enough was enough in the public outreach.
Well, I will say that is one of the nice things now that under kind of our new structure with having a long-range planning manager and our new long-range planner, who today was her first day, we now have kind of a division within NDS that will be focused just on those things. So that, I think that will help.
Cool. The other question is just a Planning Commission 101 question. This is relating to SB 974. What do we do today with development plans? What's our role today?
So right now, Planning Commission, there's some holdovers from the old code that this affects more than the new code. So under the old code, the Planning Commission would be the approval authority for any site plan or subdivision related to a PUD, any site plan that had a special use permit. So any site plan, subdivision, or development plan that was called up that you wanted to look at. So you had a lot of approval authority under that. Now that goes to staff, so you can't call up a site plan or development plan or a subdivision plan. Those need to be approved administratively.
All right, so just so the public understands, we are no longer involved in special use permits. And
on the site, you were still
site,
involved for making recommendations if someone comes to this body who wants a special exception or a special use or a rezoning. They still come to this body to get a recommendation on that. That goes to city council. But the actual site plan or subdivision or development that goes with that, once they get their special exception or their special use granted, they would submit a site plan. That would not come back to you for.
But most of those approvals, if I remember correctly, have been ministerial anyway.
Correct. Most of those have
So,
been
yeah,
on
so
consent.
That's not really a big, the change is not that big.
Correct.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
So the one big change might be that the public doesn't, or often the public only sees the site plan. We only see the site plan on the agenda. My hope is that we will post more on the permit portal. I know you guys have had issues with site plans in particular because of the file size, but it'd be great to either figure out those issues or just have them as sort of a notice on the next planning commission agenda after these are ministerially approved.
We can
they're out
definitely look into that, and I'll take this opportunity to plug the development map that is, the live map that is now on NDS's website, which is a great resource for this body, but just the public in general wants to see plans that are under review or under construction in a map form. Our GIS analyst has worked very hard on that to get that up and running.
All right, Matt, do you want to take these A, B, and C individually and go around the room, or do you want to just take them all together? My recommendation, but I'll do whatever you like, is that we just take them individually so we don't miss anything.
That was my hope, and in that way each commissioner would have an opportunity to go over what they were thinking per these questions as you go around.
And if you've got no input, feel free to say, "Yeah, I've got nothing." So the first question relates to the appropriateness of the tiers for the items that we've got. Anybody have any concerns?
I only have one about C8. It looks like this is a time-sensitive loophole. This is in Tier 3. If this is time-sensitive and it is a substantially important loophole, I'd suggest that, complicated or not, we need to get it done.
Which one is that?
This is the one that existing building exists now, so therefore I can build a second home now.
Got it.
That is a good discussion. The reason we have it on Tier 3 is because, yes, we recognize it is a loophole, but we do not know what date we would want to use. And so we would be comfortable if Planning Commission feels there is a date they wanted to move this up to Tier 2, had some feedback. The one thing I would just caution is, if staff starts to feel or starts to get a lot of what are we hearing from the community? What are we hearing from the community? Our reaction is going to be, okay, this needs to drop back down to Tier 3 so that we can actually hear from the community.
What is it? Share.
Sure. One is, I've got two ideas. One is, as the staff, or as the consultant suggestion was my understanding, was when the ordinance was adopted, that's the date. If it existed at that time, it exists. My other one is a little bit more future-proof, which is if it's 5 years old since certificate of occupancy, it exists.
And I can't remember, I'd have to look in to see how long we keep certificates. We don't keep them indefinitely. They do get purged. Is it 5 years? Okay. We're taking notes, by the way, just because you're not seeing me. I have Carrie's in the back taking notes, so.
All right. Is there anything else you guys would like to have moved?
I think my general thought on C items is that some of them do seem like they might elicit a bunch of feedback from the public. Others are just sort of complicated, like that one, in a way where we sort of need to talk about them, but that it's not something that I would imagine most members of the public are going to have strong feelings about. Things, maybe athletic field lighting is a bad example. Things like mid-block pedestrian pathways. I would think with something like that, or something like the existing structure preservation, if we had encountered this problem in mid-2023, we would have had a 5 to 10 minute discussion about it at a work session, come up on an answer, and probably no one would have commented on it. That's not all of these items, but it's definitely a fair chunk of these items. And I wonder if there's a way to sort of, make a 3A and a 3B with a more expedited process for some of them.
I think there's an opportunity if you feel there is agreement in this body, if there's certain things you would like to move up from tier 3 to tier 2. But then there's also the possibility if you feel some of these tier 3 are more important as the work plan, gets going, that these should be looked at as priorities in next year's work plan. So there's kind of two ways, I think, to look at that.
Is there anything else as it relates to these being in the right category?
The one about the townhouse, the example you had for zero lot lines or whatever. I can't remember.
So the massing versus height, when talking the townhouse effect.
No, B1, I think. You were making the alternate form.
Yes, the 4 foot.
So I'd love to see that stay in tier 2, but I feel like that's going to really take some discussion. I'm trying to understand how you're. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that one.
Certainly.
I think we could spend some time on that, and it's. I'm worried that one. I'd love to see all of these stay, not get bogged down in tier 3, but that one I do think we need to talk about.
Certainly, I can give kind of the example being in the R districts, there is a 4 foot. So one of the key differences between our old code and our new code, types of dwelling went away. They're no longer this regulatory framework of single family attached, 2-family, multifamily. That terminology is gone. Under the new code, it is all just about units and the number of units you can put on your parcel. So under the old code, you had the most common types of attached dwellings were 2-family, which was 2 units on one piece of on one parcel, no property line splitting them. And then single-family attached were 2 units, but they shared a common property line. Under our current code, in the R districts, you have a 4-foot side setback. So by code, you are prevented from having 2 units touch that have a shared property line because you can't get that 4-foot separation.
Right.
So the alternative form we're proposing is, right now, the only alternative form we have, I believe, in the code is the shop front. This would allow the alternative form to, so you're coming forward and saying, I want to allow in the R districts, I want to have 2 units that have a shared property line. So this would allow that by removing the 4 foot, but all of the regulations stay the same. All your transparency, your entry features, all those. And I will say this kind of goes to the other thing with time when we get into some of these tier 3. Even though we've come to what we think works for the alternative form, that has been a lot of discussion, a lot of internal staff meeting on what is the best way to get this form that we know we want as a community. We want to have, we don't want to make everyone build a single family or multi on one lot or have to condo it. So that's been kind of the driving.
And that completely makes sense. I guess I'm trying. So when I looked at your example, it looked like you had like an 80% lot coverage for it, and that's significantly more than anything in the R, A, B, or C. So I don't know like where those get set or looking at it quickly, it seemed like you could set up a series of townhouses, which to me, townhouses are great. We'd like to have townhouses, but this regulation seems to allow a whole block of them versus, I think it seems like you're getting more building mass than we would have before. So it just seemed like more of a discussion needed to happen.
I will say that discussion is kind of happened. This is an older draft. We just ran out of time.
Got
The
it.
newer draft talks about still having an attached one of your sides being attached. The other has to be 4, so that it prevents having a lot that has 0 on both sides.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess so. I guess are we going to see that draft at our planning commission meeting when it's time to approve this, or are we going to get a chance?
Yes, I mean when we'd come forward with the public hearing, we would have this all our final.
Okay. So my concern is just that when that finally comes to us, we're probably gonna debate it then. This is where I'm going
Yeah.
with it, is I feel like this is an item that we probably need more time to, and now I'm wasting our time talking about it, but it feels like we do need some time to dig into it as a planning commission as well. So I don't know if there's another opportunity somewhere in between now and when we vote to approve the amendments to have a chance to look at that again.
I would need to sit down with Missy to figure out the schedule. That's it. Everything you're saying is very valid, but we do run into there's some logistics that just tends to eat away at our time, and we
Yeah.
end up pushing out things we don't want to. But we definitely can. I mean, I'm definitely open to trying to see if we want to have a.
Or if the draft can go before us, and then we can kind of like maybe informally, like, yeah, this looks great. We don't really have any problems, and it'll end up on our agenda. Or if you get a bunch of feedback individually from us, and hold on a second, this needs to change, that needs to change. Maybe then we know that needs to be punted to tier 3. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think we can try. We'll look at our schedule to see if we can accommodate.
Okay.
You got something, Roy?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to jump in because I also had in my notes to discuss B1. I think this alternative form approach seems maybe like it could be a little bit cumbersome, particularly since the alternative form proposed has almost every dimension except for the side lot line deferring to the district's dimensions, right? And so I wonder, and this is sort of getting into the substantive discussion that Carl was talking about, if maybe an easier or more elegant way to do it would be simply to say that the side lot line may be reduced to 0 if it's if the other lot is part of a common plan of development. And that suggestion aside, I do think, as you kind of refine this approach, especially to continue with the alternative or the alternative form method, I think a lot of sort of policy preferences kind of get baked into how you design it. Things like, should it be allowed on one side or both? That does seem to me like something that would be appropriate for sort of an open discussion among the planning commission and probably council as well. So again, I hate to kick it to C, but I kind of agree with Carl that it's a bigger, more complex item.
I agree.
Right, looks like we generally agree.
Have the sublots been completely unworkable?
It's kind of the workaround, but the problem, one of the things too that we're trying to consider in this too is not just what's being built, but what's already been built. There's a nonconformity issue that the current code is making a lot of the city nonconforming based on just that by violating the 4-foot side setback. And then you have you have owners that are not in common development that are sharing those lot lines that we're also trying to consider. It is there's been a lot of discussion on this with staff too. It seems pretty straightforward, but it is.
Well, no, it doesn't seem straightforward, and I'm sure you guys are. I mean, I don't even want to know what's going on behind the scenes. So okay, just curious.
So, okay, please.
I'm sorry, I must weigh in on B1. So the side lot setbacks has been a challenge forever, and we used PUDs to kind of awkwardly stumble around this in the past, which was why we had so many PUDs. Stepping back, the building code does require fireproof materials if you are within that boundary. Are we just trying to solve something that is already existing in the building code?
This was a long debate during the actual development code adoption. The building code does not line up with the side setback. I can't remember that number off the top of my head. what was it?
5 feet.
Five, yeah, I knew it was off. It was not, staff had made the argument about keeping it consistent.
So, but to be clear, the 5 feet is, you can have 5 feet away from the property line, and you don't have to have any sort of protection. If you go less than that, you just have to have more of a protected wall.
Correct. Yeah, it's still, even the fire protection though, if you, it doesn't get away from the physical separation from the boundary is the issue.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to B. Is there anything that staff is wanting to do that we don't want them to do? Any amendments we'd like them not to mess with? Changes?
I didn't break this out very well.
I have a couple. I don't have the number for it, but the site triangle issue, it really depends on implementation. If this is being done in the sort of NACTO guidelines, but best practices of being based on intended speed, not on 85% percentile, and combined with management of tree canopy, signage, poles, all that stuff, to create a more consistent triangle, I think that's great and necessary. If we're talking about like federal highway guidelines to do like a super triangle, that's gonna kill every single corner lot in the city. So I'd say caution, caution, caution on that one. But the safety stuff I strongly agree with. And actually, I think that may solve some of our fence troubles because the fence is a site triangle issue. B13, parking lanes. I hear what the transportation folks are saying. I disagree with them. I'm good with making it as a recommendation, but this is not public property. This is not a public throughway. I don't see the value in mandating the same guidelines for off-street parking.
First one you mentioned, that's in tier 3, right?
I think that's in B.
That's tier 2.
Yep.
All right.
And I apologize. I did all of my notes kind of as comments on each of these. So, but let's see. B.4, lots with one dwelling unit do not have to provide street-facing entries. I still think that's. I'm not sure what the problem is or why we want to delete that. Maybe we change it so that they have to provide street-facing entry features. But I've done enough habitat houses on tight lots that they have to enter from the side, but they have a front porch that you can access from the front. Anyways, it just seems like for single-family houses, it seems a little silly to dictate that the front door has to face the street as opposed to having sort of an entrance that faces the street, if that makes any sense. Let's see. Are we gonna have a point to comment on some of these? Like, not that I want to remove them or add some, but that I want to modify and kind of
Yeah, we'll
do
go
that
through
later.
Answer the questions and we'll come around and.
Got it.
get around.
The definition of finished grade, I'm a little confused by that one as well, because it seems that grade is measured wherever the code tells you to measure it. It doesn't have to be measured at the building footprint or a certain location. The section of the code tells you where to measure it from. So we've got, for example, section 2.10.14D, fences and walls. It says oh shoot, I should have pulled this up. That point says grade. It should say finished grade. I'm gonna have to. Sorry, that's confusing. The code tells you where where to measure the grade. Is it, at the sidewalk? Is it at the street? Is it at the building footprint? So I don't know that we need to actually have I'm not sure there needs to be any more definition for finished grade, if that makes any sense. Let's see. One thing I do want to add, just as a formatting note, I would love it if, so the bookmarks, maybe I need to re-download the thing, but we've got two it seems like we duplicate the bookmarks, and then the second set of them is more detailed, and it would be nice if we could get rid of the first set of them. Does that follow for anyone that's used this yet? Like there's if I'm on the PDF and I look at the bookmarks, like Division 2, it's got, you know, Division 2.10 rules for zoning districts, and there's no breakdown of that. But then if I scroll down through the bookmarks all to the bottom, there's a whole nother set of them, and there it breaks down 2.10 to a bunch of different levels. So it'd be nice if that formatting could be fixed so that people know that there's actually a easier way to navigate through this PDF. I would also love it if there was a like at the bottom of each page, or even, you know, at each section bullet, if it indicated what the actual division is. So like some of these divisions are kind of long, so you get kind of further down through them, and I'm trying to cite what section I'm looking at, and I don't remember if it's 3.4.4 or, you know, I have to scroll back like 3 pages to find what section I'm at. So if there's some way to insert that on each page, or if instead of, you know, when you get down to the sub bullets, if you just have the full section number instead of just, you know, lowercase b or something. Does that make sense? I know it ends up it's lengthy, but it's really been a pain in the rear trying to cite portions of this code. So that's one thing I'd like to add. Other stuff to delete. I think that was it for sections to delete as well.
Rory, is there anything you'd like to have removed?
Yeah, a couple comments on that. I agree with Lyle about B13, the vehicle access. I couldn't actually find where in the SADM it talked about private parking drive aisle design. I see that in the comments it says, you know, fire has a problem with it, but if it's not a fire access lane, I guess I'm not sure I understand why it's important to fire. And generally I agree that, you know, we shouldn't be dictating, and especially dictating more space required for parking on a private lot that the public isn't going to use anyway. I think in B15 it talks about the RC height bonus for affordable housing. I strongly disagree that it should be subject to the 50% AMI requirement. I don't think that's in line with the intent that we had when we introduced that bonus. I think it should be just the standard, you know, the same as the rest of the affordable bonus in RC. I agree that there should be a section to clarify that. That seems reasonable. And then I guess for B27, that's the canopy years thing. I'm not sure if this is a request for removal, but I'm a little confused how we're saying that we're allowed to keep it as is if state code says 20 years for everybody except for Williamsburg. Oh, and I agree with Carl on a lot of the usability things. I like the idea of a, you know, section 2.8.2 continued if you're several pages down. I'd also add, it seems that a new version was uploaded in roughly November based on the document properties, and a lot of the bookmarks and internal links broke at that point and are just sort of disappeared. So in the table of contents, you know, a lot of the things you just can't click on anymore, and those links, you just have to navigate to those sections, you know, Control F or something. If we could get those back, I think that'd be a huge benefit for usability. That's all I got.
All right, let's go to C. And once again, we're going to, after we go through A, B, and C, we're going to go around just for general comments. But the question in C is, did NDS miss anything? Are there any additional amendments we'd like that they have not outlined in the document? Rory.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed one for removal. On C11 special exceptions, there's two things there. Adding locational changes seems very reasonable. Removing all rules for zoning districts 2.10 from special exceptions, I think is very premature. It seems that most of the things that have come up so far are related to that. And that's sort of the relief valve we have for a lot of those, form-based things that we don't fully understand yet. I could see doing it eventually, but not in the next year or probably 2 or 3. But then actually on this item, something I think we could add, it seems like build to width has become a very tricky sort of issue. And, I wrote most of a memo in 2023 about how it applies to certain lots. Basically, you say like 105-foot lot, right? Where the build to width is capped at or is required to be 65%. The building width is required to be no more than 60 feet. And you get into this weird situation where there's no way to meet both of those. And, if you read the build to width section down on, let's see, now finding Carl's problem, 2.10.6.A.3.A.4, it says, once the minimum build to width requirement has been satisfied, buildings and structures may occupy the area behind the maximum building setback. And I think that can be read in one of 2 ways. One is a very basic, like explaining that this is what build to width is, and that once it's fully satisfied, you can do it elsewhere. And the other is, until you hit the build to width, you can put down buildings in the build to area between the minimum and maximum setback, and it doesn't have to fill the entire width. It's just that you can't put buildings outside of it until the width is filled. That would alleviate that problem. That's why I stopped writing my memo in 2023. But rereading it, I think it's that sort of narrow or weak version of that claim, and I think that's how it's being enforced, which makes build to width this like really tricky problem where we're capping maximum widths and we're requiring a ton of build to width. Almost every lot in the city has become non-conforming, and it just seems like a big issue that's come up in a lot of applications probably, but also in sort of normal people trying to put a shed in their backyard or even an extra unit in their backyard, where they're going to require a special exception because their existing house isn't in the maximum setback. And so you have a nonconformity and, they're kind of screwed. Particularly if we were to get rid of 2.10 in the list of things you can get a special exception from. So just having a larger conversation about that, I think, should definitely be on the roadmap.
So what else did we miss? That was for you, Ari.
I'm not sure that I have anything else.
Cool. Betsy, let's get you in before we lose you.
Yeah, I guess I had a question on the active debt, came up a couple times. I'm trying to find where else I circled it, but it was in two different, it was in relation to parking garages in a way. It just seemed like it was popping up in a couple different places, and maybe even fences. Could be, you could have, like, the example of the one, what is the coffee shop? The one that we looked at on the corner of East Jefferson, and, the idea of a cafe having a fence being active versus a solid fence, So I guess I just wondered if all the discussion about what that active wall would be maybe comes together rather than be in different tiers, if that makes.
The,
Let me look at where the other one, sorry, I didn't
yeah.
lose where I had, Well, I guess it's, yeah, the description of fence, and then we're down here and we're in the active depth. You know, what's happening on either side, you know, there just seems like there could be some, making sure that they're all working together, in the way they're described. Because there's some that were by use and some that are by, you know, material.
Do you have a number, like a B or a?
Oh,
I'm
I
just-
thought I did, but I can't. You can skip me and come back if you, I can look at it again. But that's, I remember looking at it thinking that this was coming up, this idea of, where we wanted, activity, whether it was active depth or walls or fences, you know, kind of, it was asking similar questions across. So one was the C16. And then, let's see, maybe the other ones were just when looking at a fence, needing a better definition of a fence, because there are active fences like we see, along cafes or places where they're just designating, well, so that you don't fall into the street, but also it's not for a site, you know, it's not to block sight versus a fence that is to block, a view. So I just thought maybe those shouldn't be separate things, like the idea of the active depth and what you wanna see, to me, relates to the fence, cause, oh, here, the parking structures too, wherever that went. It was talking about how on the ground floor, there's different, okay, so B24, active space, it's talking about what's habitable space, residential, commercial, and then I'm looking for the one about parking, but it seemed like it was asking the same question.
I believe it was, so B24 about better defining our active depth, because we have this
Yes,
active
yes.
depth
And that was in
requirement of
tier
9 feet.
2. Sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead.
It was just saying that, and then I believe the tier 3 was more on, there was this just a broader question of parking garages are allowed,
Right.
but there's also this active depth requirement, and how do we want to address that? So I think we were just thinking of as, we could maybe address active depth in tier 2 as in the broad terms, but this idea of trying to have the parking garage, very, very similar like Water Street, where you have, in theory, you have active depth, but a lot of the districts, active depth is the whole facade up. And so that would mean pushing your parking back that 9 feet once you got above the first floor.
Okay. That was more just a question where it was like a theme that seemed to be repeating between different kinds of structures. So that's all, it's just to be consistent between, what we want to see in a parking garage, a fence, whether or not the space is being occupied by humans. It all seemed kind of like dancing around.
It is
what
all.
the intention is.
It is all connected. I will say just one of the lenses that we are looking at through this is what we can actually get done in a reasonable time. And so that's why some things that might be, that's interesting, but might be on tier 3 is because we're like, yeah, this might involve a lot of discussion. So we, let's maybe push it down a little so we get that discussion and get that community engagement.
And maybe some of that will be helped by reinforcing the tier 1 and, well, not 1 and sort of, but tier 2 discussions could help the tier 3 when we come to those kinds of decisions that kind of touch many different areas. Maybe that'll help when it comes to looking at parking garages.
Definitely.
That's all. I had the same questions about the B1, knowing that we would like attached units, but not clear if this is what, just wanting to talk through that some more. I think that's all. I was excited about some of the things to do with alleys and parking that was down in tier 3 that is gonna need some more research. But I think it's important probably to clarify, you know, what's actually legal and available, as people are looking at some of these spaces. Yeah, I think that's,
Right.
All right, I've got some questions. I saw on the slide that one of the things you're going to evaluate or reevaluate is the RNA district, but I don't see it in the table of items. Is that, am I missing it, or is that intentional?
I thought it was in tier 3.
It should be in tier 3 if it made it's definitely been on the radar because it was the RNA came out of the sensitive neighborhoods from the comprehensive plan, but there was not a lot of, there might need to be more thought put into it than what we put into it when we initially adopted the code.
Okay. So some things that are not here that I guess I'm curious where they are in the department's thinking is, you know, commercial uses in our districts. That's something that I know when I think the zoning code passed, it was like a discussion before it passed. Maybe, I forget if it was in some draft, but I think there's been talk about at some point we should look at this and kind of understand what might be appropriate. Is there a reason why that's not in tier 3, or is that something you're kind of looking at a longer time frame?
No, it probably should be. I think the reason it's not there is because it's actually been placed in the NDS work plan. And so there's some things in there like the small area plans that aren't in the tier 3 because they've already were captured there. But I would be happy to put it in just so we're making sure we're capturing it.
I see. Okay, yeah, I have seen that on the NDS work plan. I guess I didn't quite understand how that interacts with this table, so that's helpful to know. And then this is maybe just more of a comment for, you know, down the road when you're getting more to the detail of looking at these tier 3 items. But I think it'd be helpful for us to understand how some of these things in the zoning code that you're evaluating, what their impact has been on overall development. For example, we have affordable dwelling unit requirements over a certain number of units. What's the before and after picture of a lot of this stuff? You know, have we seen a change in the number of affordable units built? Have we seen a change in the number of market rate units built? Another one I'm curious about is, and I know this isn't in this the list of the 3 tiers, but you know, we eliminated parking requirements. I'm very curious to know if developers are building the same number of parking spaces per unit, more or less, you know. So I guess my questions and comments are a little bit more down the road for when you are getting into your evaluation of some of these more substantial things. Sorry, let me just look at my notes real quick. I'm going to pop back real quick to Lyle's comment on B13 maximum lane widths and how they're in contradiction apparently of the fire code and standards of design manual. I guess I'm wondering if there are certain things that are already regulated by other standards that we have, do we really need to regulate them in the zoning code? That's just a general comment about that in particular, but you know, other things that come up as well. I think that's all I have for now.
Right.
Thanks.
Michael?
Nothing, Chair. Thank you. You all got my email, so I guess I can spare us. I don't need to read through that, right?
Yes, we're working on responses.
Okay. So, yeah, those were my additions.
In terms of what I'm hearing from the public, I hear sort of two sides of the same coin, which is, oh God, how do we not build affordable housing? It's so expensive. And, oh God, we need affordable housing. How do we build more? So I'm very interested to get an understanding of how well our inclusionary zoning ordinance is doing in providing the affordable units we need, and any tools that we can provide to tweak those numbers to get more on the ground.
I will say, OCS is working on that. From the development side, I mean, what I can tell you is we're having a lot of conversations, but the applications we're getting are 4 units, 6 units. And I know what I've told this body before in the past, we're going to see a lot of units come online in the next few years, but those are all legacy projects. We're still going to be dealing with our legacy projects for years with the bulk of the units we see come online in the next 3 to 4 years.
Right. Betsy, I know you've got about 10 minutes. So let's start with you. Any general comments about where we are, what's next? Any questions about where we are, what's next?
I think maybe some of the things that we were saying could move from 2 to 3 or needed more discussion, like I think it was at least the B1 I heard. Maybe looking at the number of, I mean, that's probably a tier 3, is looking at the affordable housing, but because we can control our own work session time in a way, right? We always have the second Thursday. I mean, maybe those are things that we could flesh out more or even invite people in to discuss in terms of the number, the bonuses and, in the tier 3, just to help keep things moving as NDS lays out their plan. Because I think, some of these will move through the year and they all, they make sense to clarify, but some of the bigger issues that are moving to tier 3 that might not be as publicly, like changing the RNA or, need as much outside comment, why not bring in a couple developer, I don't know, just like have a work session about some of these topics, like the attached unit or, are the bonuses, the numbers of affordable units getting built, or are there hesitations, or, you just purposely go one down and build all you can until you avoid that bonus. So maybe somewhere through the year, if we can, as a planning commission, kind of like say, hey, today this is what we want to talk about, and maybe we could get some other input, invite people to come and discuss some of this that have been trying to use the new code, so that we're not having to ask through, NDS, but just sort of have a discussion with some developers or affordable housing providers. Anyway, that's all. It's just if we could maybe keep some time open to go more in depth on one of these, so that when we sit here and brainstorm about the language, maybe we help choose a couple that we could knock off the list if we need more discussion.
Really, I think you're onto something. I think a conversation with the PHAs and the southern developers, and with the developers and the affordable housing folks, a formal conversation with those guys to make sure we have gotten this right with us would be a
Yeah,
great
or just
value.
if they're noticing any glaring, as this list moves forward, maybe there's something that we're all totally missing.
I guess one more thing. I think on the public engagement front, I know there was talk about starting some small area plans in the near future. I think that would be a great opportunity to kind of hear from people about some of these things in tier 3. If you're going to be doing engagement, especially in a neighborhood with lots of RNA parcels, you could get feedback directly from people at the same time as doing your small area plan.
All right.
Let me, sorry, I can't quite hear you, Jose. Can you hear everyone else? But I think I agree with Betsy. I think what would really be helpful is for us to have a work session similar to those in mid 2023, where we just go through each item one by one. You know, maybe not the A's, and maybe not the B's until language is drafted. But I do think a lot of these things can be knocked out with just a little discussion. And maybe that discussion might say, wait, this is something that we should get input on. And, you know, we can, in advance of that discussion, solicit input from practitioners, from architects and developers and affordable housing providers. I think I have heard that they may have already written memos along those lines. But I think, you know, I worry that we are going to get into a trap where before changes to the code were very difficult to do, and it was the code, and any change required a ton of debate and deliberation and a year process. And, you know, when we were crafting this code, we were doing it much more efficiently. You know, it was not already adopted. We were finding and knocking out problems in a meeting where we would go through several dozen items at once, most of which, you know, were fairly minor and very technical, and most of the public isn't going to be worried about one way or the other. And I worry that, you know, with this process as laid out, a lot of things that could be accomplished and fixed through that sort of process will end up taking a very long time, simply because this is the code that is already adopted, and therefore we need to view any change to it as a very long, cumbersome process that requires a lot of public input. Again, there are things in this that do, I think, require public input, but there are many things in C that seem very technical that might need a discussion to figure out what the right approach is, but are not, you know, highly controversial or highly salient for the public items. And I would like to keep things that will require, you know, extensive public engagement to those that the public will actually care about. So that's what I got.
Okay. Michael.
Again, I'd love to sort of contribute more comments, but I think given the situation, I don't think it's in anybody's interest to sort of dictate how the city mandates its zoning code, so I'm going to refrain from any comments.
I've got a bunch of comments on some of these items themselves, and I can try to be really fast with that. Is that okay?
Please.
So B14, talk about the fences, the issue with the deck railings that we had. I feel like this could actually be really simple, and we either just exclude guardrails that are required by code, or we measure the fence from the floor surface, and everywhere we allow fences up to 42 inches in all districts, which I think would also solve the issue with the ABC barriers, because if you're allowed a 42-inch high fence, I think that satisfies any sort of ABC concerns. We also have section 210-14D1C that says when a guardrail is required on top of a retaining wall, the guardrail is exempt from the maximum height measurement. And I feel like we can just use that same logic for guardrails on elevated surfaces, such as a deck. But personally, I would just allow fences up to 42 inches everywhere, and that just solves the problem. Let's see. You've got B17, existing streetscapes determined to be in good condition by the administrator can be used to comply with the clear walk zone and greenscape zone. Your comment says comply with all standards is confusing, interpreted to mean the standards within 445D. There are no standards in 445D, so I'm not really sure what you guys are trying to get at. But it does feel like you have a problem for sure. There needs to be some sort of standard or something for the developer to comply with if they're not going to provide the greenscape and street if they're not going to provide the streetscape zone as mandated by the code. But yeah, I'm confused by what you're trying to say in the your suggested fix. Let's see, B21 fence type X. I think this had to do with about fences around outdoor storage. And I'm just curious, does this want to be a fence or does it want to be a landscape buffer? but either way, it's, because I think you've got landscape buffers with types. I don't think we have fence types. And I'm not sure that if you've got a storage yard adjacent to a street that would normally only be allowed to have a 4-foot fence, I don't think we want to mandate a 6-foot fence right there. Anyway, maybe that's a more complicated discussion than I'm understanding. I already talked about grade. Active space. Would it be easier to define, instead of defining what active space is, would it be easier to define what we don't want? You know, within a certain distance of the facade? And it seems like the big thing is just parking. But I get a little worried that, you know, we seem to also not want storage, but does that mean you can't have a closet? Like how, it seems like you need to either have, if we can't have storage, it has to be over so many square feet or percentage of the active space. Same thing with mechanical or utility space. Like it's gonna end up there at some point. And I don't think we care if someone has a water heater closet up against their exterior wall, but we probably don't want like a big generator room or something. Or maybe we throw out active space. That's kind of radical, but this active space thing is becoming a really big pain in the rear for anybody. And it might be more important just to define what that exterior wall is and how much transparency there is. And unfortunately, we may be looking into garages, but at the same time, we're having developments that can't be built because they can't build the garage they need. The B26, I'll let you guys figure that one out. I'm wondering if maybe instead we just need a process that combines lots that have different zoning designations into one, and maybe there's some process to say what that big zoning designation should be, but that's beyond me. Finally, Lyle talked about this earlier, the existing structure preservation bonus and time frame. I agree. I think we should just use Code Studio's recommendation. That seems really simple, and we can pull this out of Tier 3.
Wait, which one was that?
That was the one that stating what an existing building is, how
Oh.
long ago it has to be built, and just using the date of the code, I think that seems like a perfectly good cutoff.
Yeah. Maybe move that up to tier 2.
Yes. That's it for me.
Hey. Wow. Okay.
You know, I've just been looking into fences. The planning.org has, of course, put out a very long explainer about what a fence is and what it means to all of us, which, of course, has a lot of conflicts, stating that, for one thing, you don't need to define it, and also it's been heavily defined. Perfect. I like Philadelphia's definition, an unroofed barrier or unroofed enclosing structure, including retaining walls. I would suggest that we not reinvent the wheel on this. If we can make this simple and move forward, I think that's fantastic.
So I do appreciate that the counselors are very busy, and I do appreciate that they wanted to cut down on the number of meetings that they're having. But it worries me a little bit that they're going to be taking a look at this stuff without actually having met with us to talk about it. And I think you and Carl negotiated a bit of a compromise that you make sure that they got all the feedback that we outlined. But I think that it would be wonderful if the June 16th meeting could be a joint session. And if it can't be a joint session, it would be good if we showed up to speak, if we were given an opportunity to speak at that meeting.
So that's the 4 o'clock for council work session. So they handle that. They don't usually take tons of speakers.
Right. The bottom line of my point is I think we need to get in their ear. We as the commission somehow. All right. Matt, have you gotten what you need?
Yes, I mean, I appreciate all the feedback. We've been catching it and be evaluating it, how this can work into what we're doing. I think we're in a good direction. I think staff just wants to make sure we're moving some stuff forward. I think once we set a precedent of bringing some stuff yearly, I think the process will get easier. We've we've had this problem in the past of getting some amendments done, and that's led to then not getting more amendments, and we're hoping to change the direction of the ship, but it is changing the ship, so we'll keep turning the wheel. Yeah, I mean, I think this has been good feedback.
Ms. Creasy, in order of protocol, is there anything else we need to do?
That's the only thing on your agenda this evening.
Oh, would you like to move to adjourn?
I would like to move to adjourn at this time.
Is there a second? I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, guys.
I did not think we were getting out early.
No. I was pretty sure it was going to be an 8 p.m. thing.
Do we want to discuss anything?